they are real, flesh and bone bodies. What these bodies are is the big question. That's why the mystery remains. You hear hybrids, extraterrestrials, genetic defects on humans, um, you know, um, time travelers. I mean, I've heard it all. Maybe they were visited. Maybe they wanted to look like things that were they saw and were visiting them. And this has been a common theory with the Nazca lines for decades.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watch Mojo and the Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and today's guest is Joshua McDowell. He is a lawyer who is actively involved in the legal and investigative efforts surrounding the Nazca Mummies, which have become a subject of great controversy, not only within UAP circles, but also the broader scientific community. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to him about that in depth. Welcome to the show, Josh. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here.
For anybody who isn't familiar with this, what are the Nazca mummies and why have they become such a topic of intense debate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the mummies themselves are desiccated bodies that were found in 2016 in southern Peru, in the Nazca region, which is Ica is one of the big cities down there. It's south of Lima, inland a little bit. And there's been a lot of mummies found. It's hard to keep track of exactly how many there are. I've seen quite a few, but they're mummies that all, for the most part, have elongated craniums, three fingers. We talk about tridactyly, so three fingers, three toes. They're covered in diatomaceous earth, and some of them have some very distinctive characteristics as well, different sizes, morphologies, and there's a lot of them. And these were found allegedly in a cave and by a grave robber who has sold some, sent some to a university, and they've ended up on the four corners of the earth, actually.
As a lawyer, how did you personally get involved in this and what is it that drew your interest to them?
Yeah. So I wasn't really involved in my professional capacity, Rob. What happened was I was just on social media one day, probably X, Twitter, something like that, scrolling, and I'd seen Jaime Maussan. He's, for those who don't know, he's a Mexican reporter who had done a congressional hearing in Mexico about the bodies, and he brought them in glass cases. It's kind of famous if you follow the mummies at all, this hearing. And I hadn't seen it before, saw a clip of it, and then watched the whole video, went and found it online, and it really piqued my interest to see these bodies, about 2 foot tall bodies covered in this grayish, whitish diatomaceous earth. It just means like a clay that's got diatoms, which are, little fossilized sea creatures in it. And so I watched it, and at the end of it, he says, "We welcome forensic experts from all over the world to come view these and verify that these are real." And so, intrigued, I called my father. And my dad is a former president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. He's a forensic odontologist, and he's been doing forensics as long as I've been alive. Called him, sent him the link, and said, "Take a look at this. What do you think?" And so he watched it, called me back, and said, "Hey, this is something interesting. Why don't we go take a look?" So I emailed Jaime Maussan, and we were down in Peru just about a month or so later.
So what did you guys do once you got to Peru?
So what we did is actually, my dad's a forensic odontologist. And so first things first, he wanted to bring a forensic anthropologist and a pathologist. And so Dr. Caruso is a forensic pathologist. He's the medical examiner for the city and county of Denver. And Dr. William Rodriguez, who's a forensic anthropologist for the state of Maryland, came with us because we thought that was important to bring other experts in different fields to review these or to view these bodies and to take a look at them. And so what we did is initially we went down to the University of Ica, or Unica is the short form of what they call the university, where they have several bodies there. They've got four bodies at Unica, and then we also saw some other bodies in Lima as well.
What kind of science has been performed on these bodies, and what's the verdict been for the most part? If you look in mainstream media sources, it seems like they've been widely claimed to be debunked as anything of extraterrestrial origin. But there's some people who insist that there is something here. These are not human remains. What is your stance on it?
Yeah. And so there's a broad question. Let me kind of take that piece by piece.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of things done so far, Rob. There has been some limited DNA. I know some's been done in China, the United States, different locations. And a lot of the results are kind of quizzical, to be honest with you. I've read through them all, and there's things like bonobo, chimp, green bean, things that just don't make sense that we've seen. And it could be something to do with how the bodies have been preserved, that they've been maybe wrapped in green bean leaves. I don't know. I mean, we know that there's no great apes, no bonobos or chimps that have ever lived in the Americas. And so that doesn't really make sense why that would show up. I don't want to discount it, but it's quizzical. We've done personally while we were there, we've done fluoroscopy, which is kind of like a live X-ray. We've done CT on the bodies. And that was the main thing that we've done. With what was available in Peru, they were at a lab and we CT'd them. And they also brought in a fluoroscopy machine into the University of Ica, and we were able to do that live X-ray or fluoroscope on the bodies to look at their bone structure. And, the next question was, well, have they been debunked as extraterrestrial? And it's funny because I think a lot of people look at the mummies through an extraterrestrial lens. That's not the lens that I have personally. The, a lot of the podcasts and a lot of the interest, I think, comes from the UFO or extraterrestrial community. And the way I look at it, the way my father looks at it, is through, it's a forensic mystery. We want to solve the mystery of what these are. The facts that are really interesting about these bodies, there's different types or different morphologies. And so we have to take them each individually to talk about what the different things are. But they all have, like I said, three fingers and three toes. They're all covered in diatomaceous earth. But beyond that, they're widely varied. Some are as small as maybe 18 inches, 16 inches, somewhere in there. And some are, human-sized bodies, 5'2", 5'3". Most of them are in almost like a fetal position or a burial position. That's common with Peruvian mummies. But the idea of the burial, or excuse me, the manner in which they were buried or found is unique. The diatomaceous earth covering is unique, and we don't see that anywhere else. Certainly, there's many examples of bodies that are desiccated, preserved bodies from from the Incan time period, from the Wari time period. I'm going back in time, the Nazca time period and the Paracas time period. We see and there's great examples in museums, in historical sites all over Peru that have these desiccated, preserved bodies. But in the manner that these have been preserved, there's no other examples that I know of, and I've looked for that. Um, so those are the things that are strange about them, Rob, if you will, is the head shape. Um, the orbitals are big on some of the bodies, bigger than you'd expect to see. The fingerprints are not consistent with human fingerprints. They're mostly straight instead of what we see on our fingerprints, which are loops, whorls, and arches. Um, so it's another oddity. There's a lot of things that are strange, and our involvement has been to help, help any way we can to solve the mystery. We're willing to work with Peruvian doctors. There's a lot of Mexican doctors and investigators involved. We're willing to work with the Ministry of Culture and whoever wants help. We're wanting to do it, but we want to do it the right way. Um, trade in these bodies and mummies and ancient Peruvian artifacts, there's a lot of illegal trade in it. And it's something that we certainly don't with or want to promote in any way, shape, or form. For us, it's important that this testing is done ethically, that it's done scientifically, and that openly, so that other experts can peer review the results once they come in and make sure that everything was done the right way.
Right. And because this is kind of a topic of international interest, has there been any um, difficulties in dealing with the Peruvian government, seeing as this is like an archaeological finding that is, rooted in Peru, or how has it been navigating that landscape in terms of like doing research, but involving other countries into this?
Well, it's certainly welcome. Experts, forensic experts, scientists from all different expertises or fields are are welcome to join and to help in any way they can. But one of the holdups, Rob, is that we're dealing with bodies that aren't supposed to be moved out of the country. And some of the testing in Peru, they've got a lot of great techniques, but some of the things are limited or they're not maybe state of the art like we would have in Europe or the United States. So in November of last year, in 2024, we were my father, myself, Mr. Malsan, several of the doctors, Dr. Zalce, appeared in front of the Peruvian Congress to testify to their commission on their cultural commission to request permission to do tests that certain tests that aren't available in Peru that would be available outside the United States or Europe that could determine, in fact, what these are. Because there are tests that we can learn what they are. They're available. It's just some of these are not readily available in Peru.
Based on the findings that have been like deduced up until this point, what are some of the going theories on the origins of these mummies?
So there's a lot of theories on it. I mean, it depends on who you talk to. And so, some people say, the common skeptical belief is that some of the bodies are constructed from different animal parts. If you've done research on it, a lot of people say, well, they're llama skulls and different kinds of mammal bones. Um, Another common skeptical theory is that these are traditional mummies that were found in Peru, some of the bodies, and that they were modified, that they had fingers or toes removed. That's one of the main skeptical theory, I think, that I've heard. A lot of people think, and it depends on who you ask, Rob, you hear hybrids, extraterrestrials, genetic defects on humans, um, you know, um, time travelers. I mean, I've heard it all. And me personally, I don't want to ascribe to a theory. I try to keep an open mind through this. I think there's going to be a prosaic and practical explanation when we get to the bottom of it. I think Occam's razor would tell us that there's something that's going to make a lot of sense. But as we look at the bodies now, there are so many things that are oddities or strange that we don't have in the fossil record or we've seen anywhere else. And there's the biggest problem, I think, is that the provenance and provenience of the bodies is we don't know it. They were found likely in 2016, maybe earlier. The grave robber who found them, who claims he found them, says he found them in a cave near Palpa, which is just south of Ica in the Nazca region. And he says he found them in a cave. They were all in the same cave, and he pulled out all these different bodies, these specimens. Um, and he won't tell where the cave is. He was prosecuted for grave robbing, received a sentence, was convicted, um, gave a location, but I don't think that's the location of where the bodies were found. Um, and we don't have a location. And so the archaeologists haven't been able to go and research and do digs to look for other things. Is there ceramics? Is there tools? Is there some form of writing? Is there something of that nature that we could look at to learn more about these bodies? and that site doesn't exist. I don't think we'll ever find it.
Well, that's too bad because it seems like that's a central, like, it would be a key element of unraveling this mystery. And not only that, but because there is no site to examine, it also opens the door for skeptics to claim that this is a hoax. I've heard that, these might have been made during modern times, that they're not actually ancient. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, we have to keep an open mind. We know that there are some, let's call them bodies. I think bodies is a liberal use of the word, but I'm going to say bodies here. There are some bodies that have been made, or just put together. A great example of this are the bodies that Dr. Flavio Estrada showed in January of last year. He did a press conference, international media came, and he showed these two bodies that were dressed in traditional Peruvian gear, a yellow dress and sandals, etc., and said, "Hey, we've researched these, we've looked at them, and they're made of llama bones and modern glue and chicken bones and all sorts of other things." One of the tests found that there was human semen on one of the bodies. So a lot of really strange findings. And we know that those bodies are fake. We know that those were made by a man, his name's Manuel Caceres from that region, who was selling them as folk art. I think he was kind of benefiting or riding the mummy train to sell um, folk art for some money. And they are, I mean, the Dr. Estrada is exactly right. Those bodies in particular are made of glue and different animal bones and things of that nature. Those were never once living creatures. Some of the things that we've seen are certainly very different than those. They're, you know, many different morphologies. I would say six, maybe seven different types of bodies, ranging in all different sizes and shapes. Some look more bird-like, some are almost exactly humanoid, except for the fingers, toes, and a couple other little features we talked about, the elongated heads. Um, so yes, some of the bodies have been debunked. Some of the bodies are still a genuine mystery, and there are a lot of bodies, Rob, a lot of bodies. I've personally seen in person more than a dozen, and I've seen photos of many, many more. And I can tell you when we say the bodies are real, they're tangible, physical things. These aren't, Photoshop or, made in some, you know, Hollywood lab. These are, real bodies that we've touched, we've X-rayed, we've CT'd with experts to look at them. And so they are real, flesh and bone bodies. What these bodies are is the big question. And that's why the mystery remains. Now, all that being said, there's a lot to this. There's grave robbers. These have been changing hands. They've been sold for a lot of money. There's financial gain, financial interest. And, it's hard because that makes our job a lot more difficult, where our position is let's test them, let's find out where they are or what they are, excuse me. And then we can decide, not us to decide, but the Ministry of Culture and the Peruvian people can decide what the best location is for them. Is it a museum? Is it a sacred site in Nazca? Is it reburial? I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, but I think the Ministry of Culture and the Peruvian government should decide the ultimate resting place for these bodies.
Can you provide a little more detail on the different types of morphologies that you mentioned? Some being human size, some being like 2 feet tall or smaller. Like what do the different types of bodies represent in terms of possible origins for them, and theories that are going?
Sure. None of the bodies I've seen have any corollaries in the fossil record. I've None of these bodies are similar to anything else we've seen. So it's hard to say, oh, this is a, you know, an X or a Y. I've used the example before of a platypus where it's something that is new, that is very strange, that has certain features that aren't expected. And, up until, they were brought to England and they were researched, they thought that they were stitched together, a duck bill and a beaver body, and they lactate and they lay eggs and they have poison in their claws. It's just very, very strange and so different. And maybe that's what we're looking at here. Maybe we are looking at something that's brand new. But that's why we test them. So let's talk about it. So number one, there's bodies like Maria, Montserrat. They've named them all. And these are very humanoid bodies with a few different morphology. So once again, elongated craniums, three fingers, three toes. Some of them have orbitals, so eye sockets that are a little bigger. None of them have auricles, a pinna, exterior ears. The noses are almost non-existent. But that's not uncommon with mummies. We actually see that in other mummified bodies. Some of those things, the nose and the ear, being preserved with the soft tissue. The large orbitals, the fingerprints, the tridactyly, we don't have examples of that. Now, the elongated craniums, we do have examples of. We see that over thousands of years. We see that in North America. We see that in some places in Europe. We see it all over South America. In fact, the Paracas, that's the culture right before the Nazca. So Paracas is about 800 BC to about 100 BC. Nazca, we're looking at about 100 BC to about 800 AD. And both of them, commonly, both of those cultures would do cranial modification. They would use boards or different materials to change the morphology or shape of the head. And in fact, about 60% of Nazca and Paracas bodies or mummies that have been found, known ones, those did show or exhibit the modified cranium. So it's not uncommon. It looks very strange when you see it. It's quite shocking to see a cranium that is so elongated, I guess, or misshapen. But they did that. It's something that when a baby was born, they would, use boards or different materials to bind their head to shape it. So that's not super uncommon. That is normal, I guess, for that culture and that time period. Now, the bodies have been carbon dated, several of the bodies, and we actually see a wide range in carbon dating. We see, about 1,000 years old to 1,800 years old. Carbon dating is very tricky. If there's any kind of contamination, it can mess up the times or the dating of the bodies. And so we didn't do it. Those were done before we were involved, but I have reviewed it, and that's generally what we're looking at for carbon dating. So that's one, and those are the bodies that you see a lot of the time in newspapers and online of these bodies like Maria and Montserrat. Montserrat is pregnant. There is a fetus in her womb. And so that's a very interesting thing. Montserrat was just found about a year ago. And we've looked at the CTs and the fluoroscopy on her, and she certainly does have a fetus in her belly. There's other bodies that are, they call them the 60 centimeter bodies. Those are about 2 feet tall. And they are the ones that a lot of people have seen as well. Those are the common ones, similar to the ones that Mr. Mosan had at the Mexican congressional hearing. If you've seen that, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
They look very similar to like a gray alien type body. They're thin, spindly legs, spindly arms, small heads, yay big, and they look very, very odd. And they look humanoid in the fact that they, look like they would have been bipedal. Um, but they are, the and rib count's different. They only have one bone. They don't have a radius and an ulna. All of them have a single bone in the forearm and in the lower leg. They have a lot of things that are different. Foramen magnum, which is the hole in your skull that your neck goes into, is in the middle of their skull instead of in the back. A lot of things that are very different. They don't have a mouth per se. Um, some oddities there. There's other bodies that I've seen called insectoids. I don't think that's the best term for them. They are, to me, they're more bird-like. They are 18, 20 inches tall for the most part. Some of them have these small wings, proto wings or fins on the back, maybe 2 to 3 inches long. Um, they're also tridactyl, and you can find pictures of those online as well. Suye is one of the names of the bodies that they've given to one of these. I think they're more bird-like. They're very strange. They're thin, lightweight. Um, I've seen one, I've held one. They don't weigh very much at all, but maybe a pound or two. And to me, they don't look like they could swim or fly. They certainly couldn't walk. And we don't have anything like that in the fossil record. So they're very strange. They're very strange. And I understand why people are skeptical of these things. Um, I go in with a skeptical mindset as well. I want to be open-minded because I know a lot of people, when they have a a lens that they look through these things, they there's maybe a confirmation bias, Rob, where people say, I think these are aliens or time travelers or hybrids or fakes, and I'm going to look for the evidence to show that they're X, Y, or Z. And when we've gone down there, we've tried to say, let's keep an open mind and let's follow the science and let's see what the science tells us, because I think it's a very answerable question as to what these are. And do I have ideas? Do I have theories? Of course I do. But I want to keep an open mind because I don't want to be a victim of confirmation bias. I just want to look at what the evidence shows and then we can determine what they are from there.
So you've gone into this more or less from a place of zero assumptions at, prior to like starting the investigations. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you know, my dad and the other docs we went down with, I mean, we had, this conversation beforehand. Is certainly there's curiosity, and we all looked at, scans and things before we'd gone down, and we'd done our prep work. And, obviously we discussed ideas of thoughts and what these might be and what evidence we would look for, what testing we'd like to see done. I think that's part of the scientific method and that's part of the process. It's also human nature to do those things. But our big position was, let's keep an open mind, let's go look at them, and from there we can decide, hey, these are the tests that need to be done to get definitive answers. And so that was where we've come from. It wasn't to prove or disprove, it was just to look at the evidence and suggest certain testing modalities that could be done to get to the bottom of it.
Is this an unprecedented case, or are there comparable discoveries from across the world that you can of mummified remains that maybe look similar or have similarities that we can draw comparisons to that you're aware of?
There's really not. This is really a sui generis or a case of first impression. There's nothing like this, and I've looked. That's obviously we've had mummified remains in Egypt and different parts of Europe, all over South America. There are certainly desiccated remains or mummified bodies, but ones that look like this, no. Tridactyly is, and once again, for the listeners or for the viewers, 3 fingers and 3 toes. It just means three, try. Um, we don't have that. There's no, and really, there's not any great examples in mammals of that either. I guess there's a 3-toed sloth, There's maybe one or two other things, but these bodies are incredibly different morphologically from a sloth, an example of a three-toed creature. There are examples of humans that have genetic defects that result in, you know, two fingers or three fingers, um, polydactyly or ectrodactyly. And there's a good example of the Vadoma tribe in Africa that is a small, isolated population that has a genetic defect where they're born with feet and hands that have two or three fingers that one of the nicknames is the ostrich-footed people because their feet and hands do, especially their feet, look kind of like an ostrich, where they're branched and they're a very different morphology. It's a genetic defect because it's a small population. It's called genetic drift, where a lot of people in this population are born with this same birth defect. And so there's examples of that in different parts of the world where families have genetic defects, certainly. But what's weird is these bodies, they're so different from one another, but they all have three fingers and three toes. It doesn't really make sense. I don't know why that is. But we don't have mummified bodies that have been mummified in this manner either. So desiccated, dried, um, stored in a cave, and covered in this gray, powdery diatomaceous earth. It's a desiccant. It also has protected them uh, for thousands of years from bugs and different, um, you know, environmental issues potentially. I mean, they've been in a cave, so it's kept them dry and kept them preserved. But we don't even have Peruvian mummies, Rob, that have been preserved in this manner. We don't have any examples of this. Dr. Rodriguez, who came with us, the anthropologist, has studied mummies in various different parts of the world, and he indicated to me that he's never seen mummies in this fashion. And from our research, we've never seen that either. There's a lot of, like I said, desiccated bodies that are stored in different ways. Wrapped in textiles is a common way, but in a cave covered in this earth, we've never seen that. But all of these bodies that we've seen that are provided by this grave robber, his name's Mario. It's a nickname. Um, were all found in this same fashion, covered in this diatomaceous earth and desiccated bodies.
What do we know about the Nazca culture of the time that might provide some clues as to what these bodies really are?
We don't know a ton. They didn't have a written language, right? So what we know is from archaeological digs. We know that in South America, they're not in the same, we talk about the Bronze Age and the Stone Age, et cetera, the Iron Age. They're different. They're, lithic or kind of Stone Age, and then we go into a ceramic age. We know that the Nazca were a ceramic age people. We know that they had different holy sites. We know that they used like an adobe brick to build. We have sites like Chowchilla, which is a famous burial site in the Nazca region that you can visit. And you can actually see mummies today. You go out into the desert and they're in these underground, they're open air now, about, I don't know, 10 or 12 feet deep. Some of them are covered, some of them are open, where you can go and see some Nazca mummies that are known in archaeological sites in Peru. And so we learn a lot from these. A lot of them are covered in textiles, they're wrapped up. Some of them are found with heads, decapitated heads. Um, and some of them have different things through their lips or through their eyes, but nothing like the bodies that we have. Most of them face east in burials, and so these were found as part of an archaeological site, and so that's what we know about them. We know that they we have a lot of pottery and ceramics, and so we can see, we can learn from their designs. And one of the interesting things is in some of these designs, in both pictographs. So pictographs are paintings on rocks. Then we have petroglyphs, which are etchings on rocks or carvings. And then we also have geoglyphs. And these are important. So geoglyphs in the Nazca region are these huge, what we call the Nazca lines. These are giant images in the desert that have been made by removing stones to create lines. And so when people hear the word Nazca, oftentimes they think of the Nazca lines. And the Nazca lines aren't just lines, they're a lot of designs. And so we see hummingbirds and monkeys and humanoid type things and spiral designs, a lot of different things in these Nazca lines, in these geoglyphs. In the petroglyphs, these etchings on rocks, uh, in the Nazca, Ica, Palpa region, we often do see images of humanoids with three fingers and three toes in ceramics, in pictographs and petroglyphs. And, in a culture that doesn't have writing, we can learn what was important to them by what they gave us images of, what's preserved based on what they were drawing and what they were designing. And we do have many images of tridactyl humanoid figures, both in pictographs and in petroglyphs. In fact, in one of the locations, there's several locations, and that's a whole different story, but in one of the locations that Mario claims that he found these bodies, there's petroglyphs less than 100 yards away, ancient petroglyphs showing humanoids with three fingers. And so it's an interesting, rabbit hole to go down to say, were they seeing these creatures? Is this something they did to themselves? Did they modify themselves just as they modified their heads? Did they modify their hands and feet? And that was, a theory that some people have had. But here's what's weird is that in the feet and in the hands, you'll notice if you see the pictures, they're very long and they all have an extra phalange. So they all have an extra finger bone, like a knuckle, if you will. And that isn't something that they could do to themselves and continue to use their hands or feet. And that is something we see. And so I don't love that theory. I don't think that that's something they did to themselves while they were alive because of the extra phalanges. It would indicate that that couldn't have been done.
I'm glad that you brought up the art depicting humanoid figures with also three fingers and three toes, because one thing, as much as many people would probably love to believe that the mummies are extraterrestrials, even if they are not, let's say that they were determined to be definitively, human remains that were crafted somehow, and shaped in a certain way, the idea that it might be to emulate the image of visitors that they may have had, which are also reflected in their art, which are also reflected in the geoglyphs that you mentioned, is a compelling theory in and of itself, which is also worth consideration, isn't it?
Well, I know a lot of people that prescribe to that theory, Rob. That's actually quite a common one that's held among some of the researchers is that let me take a step back. In a lot of South American countries, and I lived in South America, I lived in Brazil for a few years. Um, I think they look at, UFOs a little differently than maybe we do in North America, maybe less skeptically, and I don't mean to cast a broad net over an entire continent. I don't know if that's fair, but in my personal experiences and in my interactions with a lot of the people I've met and dealt with, I think they're a lot more open-minded to the unknown and to the paranormal, generally speaking, but also specifically about UAPs and UFOs. And so it's more common to talk about it, or it's less fringe and maybe considered more frontier and forward thinking to talk about these things. And so it's enjoyable, it's fun to talk about. Where I think a lot of people have that theory of say, well, maybe they were visited. Maybe they wanted to look like things that were they saw and were visiting them. And this has been a common theory with the Nazca lines for decades. Um, it's if you watch Ancient Aliens or you see any of these programs or read Chariot of the Gods, they the Nazca lines are very important in a lot of these theories. Once again, I'm not a major prescriber to this, but I'm open-minded that why would they make these geoglyphs that some of them are a kilometer long? They're huge. And if you're down on ground level, you can't determine what it is. It just looks like some rocks moved out of the way. Only when you get up high, up onto a mountaintop or in a plane, helicopter, what have you, can you actually see what these represent. You can see it's a hummingbird, a mummy, a humanoid, etc. And so one of those theories is, hey, they built these for visitors. They built these for, UFOs and some of them look like runways. Um, I don't know. I don't really have a theory about that. I'm not an anthropologist or an archaeologist, and so I just know what I've read, and I've read a lot about it, and what I've talked to people about. And so that's a common theory in Peru, and a common theory of different people that I've talked to that say, well, are these humans that are trying to mimic things that they've seen? And that's one theory for some people that say, oh, these things are built, these are forgeries, or some people say they're modern day, some people say they're ancient. And that's one of the common debunking themes, if you will, is to say, well, these are fake. The counter argument is to say, well, no, these are ancient. And just like we see in pottery or just like we see in textiles, that these are representative of things that they saw. And that's a theory of one of the gentlemen that I know down there says, well, he thinks that some of the bodies that have been found are um, dolls that were made to represent, anciently made to represent things that they saw. So, and once again, I don't know. I'm just giving you some different theories that I've heard, Rob. And I mean, once again, that's why we test them. Is if we test some of these things and we find out that the carbon dating comes back as this is something that expired 50 years ago and is, a known mammal. Well, that's indicative of what they may be. Versus if it comes back as an unknown, um, something that we don't have in the DNA record, well, then that's another, maybe rabbit hole that we've got to go down, another scientific, road that we've got to pursue because until we know, we don't know.
What's been the reception from the broader scientific community on these? Is it generally speaking considered to be something worth deep investigation, or have a lot of people kind of written this off as, a nothing burger hoax, and nothing really special to look at?
Well, I've seen both. I mean, there's some people that vehemently say they're all hoaxes, they're not worth your time, they're, X, Y, and Z, and the common theories that we talked about before. And there's other people that say, no, if these are something new, individual, and unique, these could be the biggest find in archaeological history. And I would agree. If these bodies are a true biological, unaltered, unadulterated species, that they are as we see them, then there is no archaeological or historical find since, I don't know, the dinosaurs that would be as big as this. And it's a big if. It's a big if. We've got to do the additional research. And part of the problem, Rob, is a lot of people say this to me. They say, well, these bodies have been around since 2016, 2017. You'll see them in the mainstream media that these bodies are not mainstream media, but in Peru, they started to show up. And mainstream media just now, 2024, 2025, is picking up on these. The Daily Mail's written a bunch about them. You can Google it, Reuters, etc. But if you do a Google search on it, one of the first or second things that's going to pop up are articles about this press conference in January of 2024, where Dr. Estrada and Dr. Avalos were showing these fake bodies. And so I think that did a lot of harm to the research to show these well-known, admitted by the artist who made them, dolls, to say we did all the testing on them and their glue and chicken bones and etc. When Dr. Estrada has known about these bodies, he's known about Maria, he's known about all these other bodies since 2017. I have all the criminal complaints against the grave robber. I've read through them all. And he's mentioned in there as knowing about the bodies back in as early as 2017. And he knows about the different morphologies. And so to go in front of a press conference and international media and say, hey, these are the bodies, these are representative of all of the bodies, we've tested them and they're fake, is disingenuous, and it's a disservice to actual real research on the bodies. And keep in mind to do research on, ancient artifacts and especially, remains, biological remains, you need permission from the Ministry of Culture in Peru. And that's why we went to Congress, was to talk to the Congressional Commission on Culture to say, we want to do this the right way. We want to do it ethically and scientifically, and we're asking permission to be able to move them to a location where we can, a university or other lab where we can get testing done to determine what these are. And keep in mind, since these bodies were found in 2016, there's been 21 different ministers of culture, Rob. So we're talking in 9 years, this is a cabinet level position in Peru, and they've had 21 different, in the United States, we'd maybe have 2 or 3 in that time period, and they've had 21. And there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of, lack of resources. And there are different organizations, groups, doctors that have come to us, that have been communicated to me, that have said, we're happy to chip in. We're happy to help pay for this. Whatever resources you need, testing modalities, we're happy to help. Because until we find out what these are, it's hard to determine what the next step is. And I think if we do the testing, and we can do that in simple ways, we can take different samples from long bones, from the tooth, from a tooth of the different specimens. We also have better imaging modalities in the United States and in Europe that are readily available in Peru. Peru does have some DNA testing, but ancient DNA testing in the manner that has been suggested to me I know a lot of it's been done in U.S. labs historically. They've taken genetic material from Machu Picchu. Just even in 2023, UC Santa Cruz did a lot of great work with the Max Planck Institute and Yale University to test different human remains that they found around Machu Picchu to determine genetically where they came from. Were they from Incas from that region, or were they from other places? And so what we'd like to do is use a lab with the testing modalities, the experts and expertise to be able to give us all the right answers. And that's above my pay scale. I'm involved to help out any way I can. I'm obviously not a scientist or a DNA expert, but we've been working with people who are. And so if we're granted permission and to do this, then I think we can get answers pretty quickly and pretty actually quickly, easily, and cheaply. We just have to move different body parts, or I shouldn't say body parts, I should say, tissue or genetic specimens. It can be small things. But we have to worry about the collection methods. We have to worry about the chain of custody and, contamination as well. The 3 C's, as I say. We have to look at them to see or to make sure it's done right. And so that's why experts have to come in to do the testing, but from the very beginning. So whether it's moving a body itself or bodies, or if it's just using tissue samples to different universities or labs, then we can start getting answers and we can say, hey, it's settled, they're X. And we don't need any more testing because we know, or they're Y, and these are going to require a lot more testing because these are new, unique finds.
By your estimation, is this something that is going to happen in the near future so that we can get definitive answers about these?
I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I wouldn't be involved if I wasn't optimistic that we couldn't get an answer for this. And that's my goal, is to get an answer, whatever it may be, is as someone who's helped investigate this and helped with the forensic team from the US that's come down to study them. That's our only goal, is to get answers to help the Peruvian people determine what they are, and then they can determine the next step to what to do with them. And we've offered our services, and once again, my services, that my father's and other doctors, to come down free of charge. We're not getting paid for this, to go down and to help out, to help solve this mystery. It's, for me and for my dad, it's kind of become a little bit of a labor of love, that we want to help the investigators and ultimately the people of Peru to know what these are, because we're very much against grave robbing and trafficking of these bodies. And because I know a lot of people have said this to me. They say, Josh, just grab a tooth, grab a bone, do something, and just take it to a lab. And I know that's been done. And there's issues with the three C's we talked about a minute ago, but there's also major ethical concerns and there's treaties between Peru and the US about pre-Columbian artifacts, and there's also international and federal law. And no matter how much we want to solve this and how much we want to get answers, we're not going to take any shortcuts, and we're not going to do anything illegal or unethical or inappropriate, scientifically or legally, to get answers. So for us, that's why we've been trying to go through Congress. And we're hopeful that in the very near future, there's going to be another congressional hearing where, once again, I testified, my father testified, some of the Peruvian docs, and also some of the Mexican researchers, and one of the Mexican docs testified that these are worthy of additional study, and we believe that, no matter what they are. If And to me, whether these are a unique find, a platypus or a new dinosaur or whatever, as an analogy, or if some of these are hoaxes or what have you, that the answers are important, and it's worthy of additional study.
Here's a big question to maybe cap off this podcast. If we could put our speculation hats on for just a moment, um, if proven to be authentic extraterrestrial beings, what would be the implications, broadly speaking, for humanity? Like this would change everything, wouldn't it?
It would. It would. I mean, you know, it's I'm gonna play along, Rob. I don't look at this through, like I said, through the extraterrestrial lens, but I know a lot of people do. I know a lot of people have that thought, because I don't know. It's legends, it's myths, it's stories of um, abductions and things that people have told um, for decades, and probably much longer than that. That these are visibly similar to what has been described by a lot of people. And so, putting on the speculation hat, if these things are determined to be extraterrestrial, I think it would be the most important find in human history. How would we determine that? Because their DNA is going to be different. There's I don't know. It's going to be, a lot of people say, fringe or frontier science, but it takes people like the investigators that are working on that to make these discoveries. When dinosaurs were first being found, it was, oh, there's a prosaic explanation, until we started finding more and we realized that these were, in fact, ancient living, dinosaurs that once lived on Earth. And then we started finding more and more and more. And this may be the case here. I don't know. But it is an evolving and emerging space that we're willing to look at, spending our own time and own money to determine what these are, to help the Peruvians and the Mexican teams that have been working on this. And I know a lot of people hope they are. And it would be phenomenal if it was. But that would be years in the making, I think, Rob, to determine that they were extraterrestrial. I don't know how we would determine that. I think we could determine, there's scientists that are going to come up with new and clever ideas to say, hey, these do not appear to be carbon life forms that started on Earth. I don't know. I This is wild speculation for me, um, and I'm willing to play along because I know a lot of the people that have wanted to talk to me about this are enthusiasts in extraterrestrial or the paranormal aspect of this. And my perspective, and I always say this, is I think we're going to find something that makes sense. We're going to find uh, a real prosaic explanation, whatever it is. And maybe that explanation is it's a platypus. It's a brand new thing that we haven't seen before. It's a dinosaur. It's a real fossil. It's something new. These are things that lived with us. And that's another common theory is these are like Denisovans or uh, a Neanderthal or a different branch of human evolution. That's another common theory. And I don't know. I don't know. But whatever we determine they are, I think it's going to expand what we know, hopefully, about the people from that time. And, also learn for the next thing that we find, the next archaeological discovery that's in Peru or mummy or holy site. So it's important to learn from this, whatever the answer may be.
How important is public interest in getting answers to what these are? I think we're reaching new levels now of public interest just in the UAP discussion with the congressional hearings that we're having on that side and the military whistleblowers who are coming forward and talking about their experiences. So it's being spoken about more and more openly in society. Is that instrumental in moving forward on this path of investigating these mummies?
I think it is. I mean, you take a look at it, and even the example of how you know the doctors that I've been working with got involved is it was something I saw on social media that piqued my interest. And so hopefully the more people that know about it, the more people that get good information, not information from people that are intentionally trying to give disinformation or misinformation. And I know there's a lot of it. And I even talked about that in front of the Peruvian Congress, that it's it's disingenuous to say that these are dolls or these are X, Y, and Z when you're using uh, examples that are completely different than what we've been studying. When they know full well about the other bodies, they know where they are, they can examine them, and they've known about them for nearly a decade. And then they're showing dolls that they know are dolls. And that's what, if you do a Google search, that's what you're going to find, is you're going to find debunked, hoax, hoax, hoax. Forensic anthropologist from Peru says they're dolls. And yes, the ones he was showing were dolls. But thank goodness for people like Jaime Maussan, who is out there. And like I said, a lot of people say it's fringe, but it takes people that are willing to, you know, go out and explore and to go out and investigate these things to make those discoveries. To say everything's been found and everything's solved, that's not accurate. There are going to be new things out there. Now, whether these are or not, that remains to be seen. But I know that we're finding new species of animals, even large mammals and bugs and fish every year. We're discovering new things. And if these are a new, true archaeological, anthropological discovery, then it certainly needs to be studied. And it can make it into the next textbook. Whatever these are, I mean, it's a forensic mystery that needs to be resolved, and hopefully will be a textbook case to help us in future examples of things that are found. It will be instructive, or it'll educate us a little bit on what to look for.
You mentioned navigating between good info and disinfo, and a Google search will provide you with first, all of the articles debunking claims. In your view, is there a concerted effort to suppress information about this, or like why would all of the debunked stuff surface to the top when somebody is researching this?
Well, you'll have to ask the guys in Palo Alto about that at Google to see what their algorithm is. I don't know. I will tell you there's some places you can find some good information. Tridactyls.org is a new site that was started by some of the researchers just recently. Um, and it's got a lot of images and different scans of the bodies. It's a great resource. It's still being built and added onto, and I'm sure it'll keep growing. I've blogged about it on my website, McDowellFirm.com. And a lot of it's my law firm website. And so I'm talking about DUIs. I'm a criminal defense attorney. So I'm talking about DUIs and criminal defense and self-defense and all sorts of things. But you can click on a tab to read about the Nazca Mummies because I like to give information from my point of view because I've been there, I've seen it, I've done the interviews with the people. I've interviewed so many of the people involved in this, the early docs, Jaime Maussan, Mario himself. I was able to interview the man who says he found the bodies, and I've learned a lot. I've been there, I've seen it, I've seen the testing done live. And so I try to give it from my perspective where it's open, honest, and just from my point of view to say, hey, I'm not making money on this. I'm not monetizing this in any way, shape, or form. I'm trying to tell the story that I think is important and interesting. And a lot of people find it too. If you don't, you can read about lie detector tests and DUIs on my website too. But it's something it's kind of fun for me. So I do think it's important that more people talk about it and try to get good information out there. So I've been happy to do podcasts, and I've done a few where I'm happy to talk about them. And now most of the time, in fairness, Rob, it's UFO or paranormal podcasts that are interested in this. But I hope in the future that more, and I hate the word, but more mainstream type podcasts also take interest as well because it's a great story. No matter what the findings are, no matter what the resolution is, whether it's the biggest find in human history or it is, one of the most well orchestrated and clever hoaxes. I mean, those are the two far ends of the spectrum, I think, that is the continuous argument over what these are. No matter what they are, the story's incredible. And is the more research I've done, the more I've found out, it's amazing the things that have happened and are continuing to happen. Uh, Even the phone calls I've had this week that are brand new information and brand new things that are happening are just fascinating to me. And I hope to talk about them soon and hope to share some of the things that we've been learning. And there's new bodies that have shown up even in the last 6 months that I've seen that are strange, that are unlike any of the other bodies that you've seen photographs of online that have different morphologies that I've only seen photos of. I haven't seen in person yet, but I'm excited to take a look at them to see what these are.
Well, I can tell you this has been a fascinating thing to start learning about. I'm very happy to have spoken to you about it. I think anybody who is interested in learning more, I will provide links to the resources that you mentioned in the comments for this video. And to anybody watching, please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm really interested to know what everybody thinks about this, because as we mentioned, it's a somewhat controversial thing. Everybody's got their opinions about it, but ultimately, I hope that we one day get definitive answers about what these are, where they come from. And until then, we should just keep talking about it and share the information that we have. So thank you so much, Josh. I hope to speak to you again, and thank you for your time today.
Anytime, Rob. Happy to be here.
Great. Take care, everybody. See ya.